Have you ever heard of reverse coloring? Well, in today's video, we are going to talk about what reverse coloring is and how to make it actually look good using watercolor and colored pencils. Okay, so you're going to need watercolor paper. You can use any watercolor paper for this design. Even cellulose paper works really well with reverse coloring. I am using a bigger round brush, a size 10. I'm using my limited palette of watercolors, cad yellow, magenta, cerulean, indigo, and sap green. And then for the colored pencils, I am using Lyra watercolor pencils, but you can use colored pencils, pastels, watercolor pencils, even pen, anything that adds extra lines after you do the watercolor. I thought this would be the perfect time to paint spring themed designs, so we're going to be doing flowers, fruits, and vegetables, which feel very springy to me, and I want to talk you through some of the main concepts of reverse coloring. And there's a few different ways you can do reverse coloring. My way is not the only way. I've been doing it this way for years when I want to do sketchbook practices or keep something really sketchy. It's a perfect technique for card making, for beginners. Anybody can do this technique and it always looks good in the end. Okay, so here at the top I am painting a daffodil, but you don't want to paint a daffodil. You want to choose the main colors in a daffodil and do daffodil-esque shapes that do not turn necessarily into a daffodil. So for the trumpet, I put down the orangey red color, but I didn't really fill in the gaps because when we add our lines later, we love white space. White space is your friend with reverse coloring. We don't need to fill in all of the spaces or the gaps. We're giving the idea and the impression of the flower. We can even add too many petals. We can just do a big blob of yellow and then add the petals with the lines later as well. For the leaf, I did do a more exact leaf in color. It's a little bit of a wonky shape, but we're going to do a lot of the shadows and the detail and the line work with the added lines later, so I would just keep everything very simple if you're doing an exact flower like a daffodil. Here for this pink, I'm just choosing all different colors of pink, purple, magenta, reds, and kind of laying them in a random pattern on the paper. You can add water to create interest. We want different layers of values and depth, so really high pigmented areas, really watery areas, and areas where you feel like there should be something, but we're not going to paint anything there because that's another place we're going to add line detail. The flowers on this one are very abstract. I'm not sure where they're going. They could be sweet peas, but then I didn't do the right greenery for sweet peas, and that's okay. We don't necessarily need to know where they're going in the watercolor layer because the lines will make everything make sense that we add later. And then this one down here, I was imagining a delphinium type shape, but I don't want to create a delphinium. I want to create blobs of color that, like we said before, give interest and a little bit of shape, but we're mostly playing with color and values. We want darker values, which means more pigment, and we want areas with lighter values, which means more water. And we can have areas where it's pretty much only water, but when it touches the other areas of high pigment, we get these nice bleeds and blends. This is the place in the painting where we want to experiment with subtle bleeds and blends, and then we're going to leave everything. We're not going to add anything extra in watercolor. So keep that in mind while you're painting. What do you want to put down here in watercolor? Keep it light because a lot of the darker details will come from the lines that we add later. This can be a really hard practice because we are used to painting and filling in a space to create the object, fully painting it, maybe leaving some white space or some areas that are artistic on the ends, but not most of it. But I think it's a really important practice in looseness and leaving things alone. So the goal is going to be to make the fewest strokes possible, to add colors that bleed and blend, and make sure you have differences in values. The the dark values and the light values, which I've already said. Make sure you have those. It will make your lines that you add later look better. So the technique that I use for reverse coloring is I add really sketchy, loose, blobby shapes to my watercolor paper in watercolor, and I let it completely dry, and then I add my colored pencils over the top. In this case, I will be using watercolor pencils only because I feel like the texture works really well with watercolor paper, but you can use almost anything. Crayons, like we talked about before, pastels, pen, um, colored pencils, regular colored pencils. So it's totally up to you. But we want to keep these shapes very loose and open, but we can still kind of get an idea of what they look like. Other methods of reverse coloring could be you paint a whole page of colors, and it's just blobs of color that are blending and merging together. You have all the different values, the darker pigments and the really watery washes blending together. And you can maybe do a reverse coloring of a landscape. So you have blue shapes in the sky, you have green, yellow, greenish blue shapes for the land, and they're blending together. It's all one big blob. You have not defined any shapes. And then you can go in and use colored pencils to define bushes and trees and other plants, but you do that based on how it dried. So it's another kind of reverse coloring where it's a little less predictable and you let the watercolor tell you what is there versus this watercolor reverse coloring is a little bit forcing the shape because we can tell what the shape is going to be in the end, but that's okay. We're just mostly focusing on swipes of color that give us a general idea of the object that we're painting. I love this way to reverse color. I just made a birthday card the other day for my mom with strawberries and blueberries and these raspberries. I think raspberries in reverse coloring are the coolest. And it said, "We love you very much." And I just think using reverse coloring on cards is a great way to make berries, which can be, it's just a berry on a card, which can still look good, but it just makes it cute, really, really cute, and takes it to a very birthday card level. So now that we can see the berries that I've painted, I have strawberries, blueberries, raspberries. Me telling you that, you can see it. You can see that those are raspberries, you can see that those are blueberries. But if I had that on a page and this was the finished piece, you might think, your raspberries could be better. This is not about raspberries looking good. It's about maybe kind of a little bit having a raspberry shape, and then we create the magic of the final shape with the lines that we add later. So same with this carrot. We can tell it's a carrot, but it's not a good carrot. It doesn't have to be a good carrot. We're just kind of blocking in the colors, leaving white space, adding different values, adding different colors, even colors that you wouldn't expect. We are staying pretty fairly true to the actual color of the object with the watercolor process part, but we can go crazy and have so much fun with the colored pencil oil pastel additions. If you're doing pen, that would be really cool because you can make your pen drawings exact. You could draw an exact carrot over the top of this carrot blob, and then they merge together to make a beautiful piece of art. So instead of starting with the lines like a coloring book, it gives you the lines and you color it in. We are reverse coloring where we are kind of painting in the idea of it and then adding the lines, which I think gives a really sketchy, painterly look, and I love it. This process of only leaving an idea of a shape can be really tricky, and our brain and our body and our soul just really wants to fill it in all the way. Even on that farther right strawberry, I fill it in too much. That's okay. It will look good still with the lines added over the top. But this is a practice in letting go, letting it be a blob. Don't fill it in. If you think it's good, it probably is. Leave it. The colored pencils are where we get to add all of those details and you get to make it as perfect or as sketchy or as wild, as abstract as you want it to be. Now my watercolor has completely dried, and I'm going to move my watercolor and my water away because we don't need it right now. Now we're going to get out the sketchy, over the top medium. Colored pencils, watercolor pencils, crayons, oil pastels, or just ink, a pen. Any of that will work. It's super fun to use watercolor pencils or colored pencils because you get to add layers and layers of sketchy color, and that is my favorite look to do. So I like to start when I am approaching this blobby shape. I like to start with the main shapes. Okay, we need to make the petals. I am starting with yellow to define the petals, but you'll figure out pretty quickly that using the colors that are actually there that you painted with watercolor doesn't necessarily look the best. They kind of blend in together. So using orange on the petals, for example, looks really good. Using magenta on that orange trumpet is going to look really good. And I can define some of the shapes that I left out, like the ring around the top of the trumpet that kind of makes the center, and I can add shadows by using a color's complement. So I think that is the trick. That is what makes this technique look so cool. It's the colors that you use. When you're doing, say, pen for more of an ink line over the top, that's more about precision in my mind, or it can be more about it being wild and sketchy. But when you're doing the colored pencil technique, you have a unique opportunity to add colors that are not there. So for a daffodil, we don't see blue on the daffodil, but we actually see shadows, and blue and orange are complementary colors. So anytime you can add a color's complement to that color in this sketchy technique, it really brings the painting to life. And you can see on the daffodil, when I added blue on that orange trumpet, it's kind of mind-blowing how good it looks. So when we painted it with watercolor, we were sticking to analogous colors, colors that looked good together while they bled. And then when we add the colored pencils, we can have a lot of fun with a color's complement. On the daffodil petals, purple is a complementary color to yellow. So I can add purple in some of those shadowy colors on the details, and it looks amazing. I can add magenta or pink to the leaves, these green leaves, to create shadows and interest. And it pops out in really fun, sketchy ways. It doesn't have to be exact. That's another part of this process. Nothing has to be exact, but as we are adding these sketch details, our blob transforms into the actual object that we were trying to paint. The daffodil has become a daffodil, and look at all the really cool colors that we've used to get it to look like a daffodil. Memorize which colors are complementary. I'll tell them to you right now. Yellows, complementary to purples. Now, when we color mix, it can vary, obviously, but that's a general idea. Orange and blue, complementary. Greens, complementary with like reds and pinks. So depending on which direction they go on your color wheel, they'll be more complementary or not, but it's just a good general rule of thumb. But outside of complementary colors, you can definitely use lots of normal, quote unquote, colors for that object. So a pink and purple flower can have lots of pink and purple and some blue colors within the flower. You don't necessarily have to try to shove yellow and green just because they're complements. Too many complementary colors can look odd. The complementary colors should add detail, slight shadow, kind of create this interesting piece and not necessarily be the main focus. So when I am sketching around the leaves, I can use green, I can use yellow, I can use blue, and those look great. And then just a slight pink, a slight red, takes it to another level. But definitely use those analogous colors, sketch around it, sketch inside it. It's a great way to kind of glaze and color over the top of some areas. But at the same time, we need to leave enough watercolor. We don't want to completely color over the top of our watercolor. So finding that balance of sketching inside on top of the watercolor, sketching around and leaving white space and leaving some of the watercolor is this little dance that we're doing. This takes time, this is an experiment, and this is for fun. If you accidentally or on purposely cover up too much of the watercolor with your colored pencils, it's still going to look good. This sketchy reverse coloring process, I feel like it's really hard to mess up. You can sketch all over it and it still looks really, really cool. But if you want to make it look how maybe you're envisioning in your head, just leave some more of the watercolor and make sure that you are using some of these color pairings that we talked about. Another tip I have is don't be afraid of leaving white gaps, because the white of the paper is helping us tell the story too. When we're doing these sketches, we don't necessarily want to hug the lines exactly onto the shapes that we've made. We can kind of float our pencil lines outside of the watercolor blobs and create shapes within the white space as well, because the white space acts as a highlight, it acts as movement between the watercolor. So if we can help define where the white space is, that also benefits us. I find this practice of reverse coloring to be very calming, very relaxing, and really satisfying, because I'm able to produce something that I think looks really cool and looks good without actually having to worry about controlling watercolor. I'm not really worried about all of the watercolor techniques that I need to make sure are perfect every time. I'm just having fun and playing, experimenting. And I think that's one of the most important parts about watercolor that as instructors we might not teach enough. This is all just for fun. We have one beautiful wildlife, and you are worth using the good paper, and you are worth taking the time to just have fun and make something weird and make something beautiful to you. Make something bad. Bad art is not bad art. Bad art is just an opportunity to learn and grow and create and get your hands dirty and figure it out. So, this, I think, is a great step along that process. And I am going to finish this video playing some nice music while you watch the rest of the process that's very beautiful but also very repetitive, and I will see you at the end of the video. And we have finished all of our sketchy designs. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. All of the complementary colors working so well together to create something so beautiful. And if you get a little mark because you're just having so much fun and you want to remove it, I like to use small little utility knives like an X-Acto knife to scratch off the surface of the paper very lightly, and then I go in with an eraser and smooth it out, and it's like it never happened. It's magic. This is a little utility knife. It's called a Kiridashi knife that my husband made for me. But yeah, you can use anything really that kind of has that ability to scratch. But this is our final product. If you get a nice close-up look, you can see it's so beautiful, and you can tell between that first watercolor stage and now we can really see what everything is, because the watercolor stage that is really loose and blendy and the sketchy stage combined together to make something beautiful with reverse coloring. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know if you have any questions below, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.